Ukraine has successfully defeated Russia on one of the most heated battlefronts, and this has placed Putin in an impossible position. The consequences of this defeat have been so huge that Moscow is in a panic, with Putin trying to figure out his next move as he has just been forced to abandon one of his most critical geopolitical strongholds, Syria. Putin has had to abandon his Syrian interests and military bases and run with his tail between his legs after suffering tactical losses. This was due to Ukraine's involvement, showing that as Ukraine continues to resist Russian aggression on its own soil, its influence is also being felt on distant battlefields, reshaping the dynamics of this conflict far beyond its borders. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden connections and unexpected alliances that Ukraine has made that played a pivotal role in this dramatic tactical victory. We'll also talk about how Putin has been outsmarted and how this has led us nearer to the end of this long and bloody Russo-Ukraine conflict. Your support for our content is always very much appreciated, especially when we have Putin's bots and the algorithm heavily suppressing our reach every time we talk about something that seems unfavorable to Putin's regime. We take pride in bringing you uncensored, impartial news, and we would like to keep that up. So please keep liking and sharing our content, as that does wonders for us. To understand just how Ukraine has helped kick Russia out of Syria, we need to first dive into Russia's involvement in Syria and how the conflict in Ukraine has played a crucial role in changing the dynamics of this region. Russia's involvement in Syria began in 2015 when it started a military intervention to support President Bashar al-Assad's regime. The primary reason behind this support was to protect its strategic interest in the region. Russia aimed to maintain its influence and secure its military presence in the Middle East, particularly through its naval base in Tartus and the air base in Hmaimim. Because of Russia's long-standing ties with Syria, dating back to the Soviet era, Syria and the Assad regime was Putin's Middle East stronghold. To strengthen this stronghold and build a deeper relationship, Russia's support for Assad has been multifaceted. Militarily, Russia provided air support to Syrian government forces, conducting airstrikes against opposition groups and ISIS. This aerial campaign was crucial in helping Assad regain control over significant parts of the country. Even recently, in the past few weeks of war, as the rebels pushed the soldiers back, Russia carried out a series of airstrikes in rural parts of Idlib and Hama in pursuit of terrorist hideouts. Additionally, over the years, Russia deployed special forces and military advisors to assist Syrian government troops on the ground. To make them even more effective against the rebels, Moscow supplied the Syrian army with advanced weaponry, including tanks, artillery, and missile systems, further bolstering Assad's military capabilities. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that Russia is part of the reason why the Assad regime lasted as long as it did. Beyond military support, Russia played a diplomatic role in backing Assad. It used its position in the United Nations Security Council to veto resolutions that could harm the Syrian government and work to build alliances with other key players in the region, such as Iran. Russia also hosted peace talks aimed at resolving the Syrian conflict, though these efforts often favored Assad's position. All this serves to show just how vital Russia's role has been to the Assad regime and how busy Putin has been in the Middle East. With that at the back of our minds, let's shift our focus to the Ukrainian conflict for a second. Trust me, the Russian involvement in Syria and the Russian-Ukrainian war are more linked than you would like to think. The origins of the conflict can be traced back to 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea following Ukraine's Euromaidan protests, which led to the ousting of the pro-Russian president. This move by Russia sparked international condemnation and led to the imposition of sanctions by Western countries. The situation escalated into a full-scale war in 2022, when Russia launched a large-scale invasion of Ukraine, aiming to overthrow the Ukrainian government and bring the country back under its influence. The war in Ukraine has to this day been marked by fierce fighting, with Ukrainian forces putting up a strong resistance against the Russian military. Ukraine has gone from being on the defensive to invading Russian territory, particularly in the regions of Kursk and Belgorod. The conflict has also seen significant international involvement, with Western countries providing military aid and economic support to Ukraine, while imposing severe sanctions on Russia. Where Syria and Ukraine intersect is how the ongoing war in Ukraine has had a profound impact on Russia's ability to maintain its involvement in Syria. By employing different tactics against Russia, Ukraine has cleverly backed Russia into a corner that has forced them to abandon Syria and leave Assad to fend for himself. Let's dive into how Ukraine managed this clever trick. To start, it's important to understand that Russia's military capabilities have been significantly strained due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. With much of its military resources and attention focused on the Ukrainian front, Russia has recently struggled to provide the same level of support to Assad's regime as they have in the past. The Russo-Ukrainian War was expected to be a swift and decisive campaign. However, Ukrainian resistance has been incredibly strong, turning what was supposed to be a quick operation into a prolonged and bloody 3-year war. This has forced Russia to continuously funnel resources into the Ukrainian front, depleting its stockpiles and wearing down its troops, who never expected a long campaign to begin with. The war has demanded a massive allocation of troops, equipment, and logistical support, stretching Russia's military resources thin across multiple fronts. This has heavily affected its ability to maintain a strong presence in other regions, particularly in Syria, as we'll be discussing in just a minute. Logistics have been a major headache for Russia throughout the war as well. Supplying a large-scale military operation over vast distances is a complex and resource-intensive task, and Russia's supply chains have been under constant strain, struggling to keep up with the demands of the front lines. The need to transport ammunition, food, medical supplies, and equipment across long distances has stretched Russia's logistical capabilities to their limits, to the point where all the focus has been on delivering supplies to the troops fighting against Ukraine and nowhere else. These issues in Ukraine have had direct consequences for Russia's operations in Syria, as it has been forced to scale back its support for Bashar, leading to the collapse of the Assad regime. This loss of support for Syria has manifested in several ways. Firstly, the reduction in air support played a pivotal role. Russian airstrikes have been a crucial element in supporting Assad's forces against opposition groups in the past. However, with a significant portion of its air force redirected to Ukraine, Russia has been unable to maintain the same level of air operations in Syria. This has allowed opposition forces to regroup and mount successful offensives under the leadership of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham rebels against government-held areas. With organized tactics and limited resistance, this has led to the rebels capturing Aleppo and Damascus and the deposing of Bashar al-Assad's regime. We have a full video that we made of the timeline play-by-play of this event. You can watch it here to get yourselves up to speed. Secondly, the redeployment of ground forces has been another area where chinks in Russia's support to Syria showed. Russia had deployed special forces and military advisors to assist Syrian troops. However, many of these units have been recalled to bolster the Russian presence in Ukraine. This is because of the sheer losses Russia has been taking against Ukraine. Were Ukraine not mounting a strong resistance, Russia would have a lot more troops to dedicate to Assad, but this has unfortunately not been the reality. As of last month, Russian combat losses in Ukraine amounted to almost 700,000 troops, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. This is a staggering number, and it shows why Russia has been pulling back troops from Syria to replace those lost on the Ukrainian front lines. This action of self-preservation left Assad's forces without crucial support on the ground, weakening their position against rebel groups. For those Russian soldiers that remained in Syria, well, they have been struggling given how little support they have been getting. The impact of these logistical challenges we just discussed is evident in the shortages reported by Russian troops posted in Syria. There have been numerous accounts of soldiers lacking basic supplies, from ammunition to food, and even proper winter clothing. This not only affects their ability to fight effectively, but also has a significant impact on morale. A demoralized and undersupplied army is far less effective on the battlefield. Such a caliber of troops fighting against well-organized rebel soldiers who are seeking freedom and are highly motivated is a very bad matchup. It's no wonder the rebels gained ground so quickly. Thirdly, the impact on Russia's naval presence has been diminished. The Russian Navy has played a key role and projecting power in the Mediterranean, with its base in Tartus serving as a strategic asset. However, the demands of the war in Ukraine have required the redeployment of naval assets, reducing Russia's ability to maintain a strong maritime presence in the region. Also, since the war began, using unmanned attack drones, Ukraine has successfully shrunk Russia's Black Sea Fleet, sinking about 15 of its pre-war fleet of about 36 warships and damaging many others. This destruction of the naval fleet has limited Putin's capacity to support operations in Syria and respond to threats. All this has just added to Russia's diminishing presence in Syria, and it hastened the collapse of the Assad regime. In addition to these military challenges, the economic strain of the war in Ukraine has further hampered Russia's ability to sustain its operations in Syria. Simply put, Russia has not had the money to fund its military operations abroad. This is because Russia's economy has been struggling under the cost of the war and the weight of sanctions imposed on it. Well over 16,000 sanctions have been imposed on Russia, its companies, and various key citizens. These have had a tremendous toll on the Russian economy. At the beginning of the year, the Pentagon estimated that the military operations in Ukraine had cost Russia up to $211 billion. This includes direct military expenditures, such as the cost of equipment, ammunition, and logistics, as well as the economic impact of international sanctions and lost revenue from canceled arms sales. By now, months later, this figure has no doubt increased substantially. The economic impact of the war also extends beyond direct military spending. Russia's gross domestic product (GDP) has taken a hit, with losses recorded in 2022 when the war started amounting to between $81 billion and $104 billion. The financial capital destruction measured by the market value of companies on the Moscow Stock Exchange also reached $322 billion that same year. These economic challenges have put significant pressure on Russia's economy and its ability to launch and fund campaigns. The weakening of Russian support toward the Assad regime has now allowed Syrian rebel forces to gain ground, challenging Assad's regime and disrupting Russia's strategic goals in the region. It has also forced Russia to reconsider its priorities, focusing its resources on the conflict in Ukraine at the expense of its operations in Syria. By proving to be the bigger threat to Moscow, especially by bringing the fight to Russian soil, Zelensky has made Russia narrow its focus on Ukraine, abandoning Syria completely. Where military and economic support is tangible and quantifiable, there is a non-tangible component that Ukraine has robbed Russia of, and that is the loss of diplomatic support towards Syria. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia has been pouring a lot of its resources and diplomatic efforts into this conflict in an effort to make demands and find a resolution on its terms. This shift in focus has had significant consequences for Russia's involvement in Syria because, for years, Russia was a key ally of Bashar al-Assad and helped broker peace talks. These diplomatic efforts that Moscow made elevated it to a major player in the Syrian conflict. But now, with the Ukraine war taking center stage, Russia's focus has shifted dramatically. One clear example of this shift is Russia's reduced involvement in Syrian peace talks. In recent months, Russia has been less active in pushing for negotiations and has taken a backseat in the peace process. This is a stark contrast to the past, where Russia was a driving force behind many of the diplomatic efforts in Syria. You're probably asking why this matters. Well, the reduced Russian involvement in Syrian peace talks means that other players, like the United States and European countries, have stepped in to fill the void. This has led to a more fragmented and complex peace process, making it harder to reach a lasting solution. This has culminated in the HTS rebels and their backers taking advantage of this fragmentation and taking Syria right underneath Russia's nose, and Putin couldn't even do anything about it because he has his hands full, thanks to Ukraine. All these are ways that Ukraine has been slowly chipping away at Russian power in Syria. While all these other methods can be somewhat said to be indirect methods that Ukraine has kicked Russia out of Syria, Ukraine's alliance with rebel groups in Syria is a direct one. In fact, their involvement shows that Kiev doesn't mind getting its hands dirty in pursuit of its broader goal of freedom. Ukraine has been working with some jihadist groups in Syria in an effort to make Putin's life more difficult. Ukrainian military advisors actually played a crucial role in preparing Syrian rebels to fight against the Assad regime. These advisors shared their expertise in various combat tactics and strategies that had proven effective in their own conflict with Russian forces. This meant exposing Russian weaknesses and cracks in their fighting style, a strategy that bore fruit. One of the key areas of training was even drone warfare. Ukrainian advisors introduced Syrian rebels to the use of drones, particularly first-person view drones, also known as kamikaze drones. Ukraine sent 150 first-person view drones and 20 drone operators to the HTS rebels. These drones allowed the rebels to carry out precision strikes against Assad's forces, targeting key infrastructure and military positions with remarkable accuracy. This played a huge role in the HTS's ability to capture the capital and depose Assad in a lightning-fast 9 days. The training extended beyond just operating these drones. Ukrainian forces taught rebels how to manufacture and repair them, ensuring that they could sustain their drone capabilities even under challenging conditions. This knowledge proved to be a game changer on the battlefield, giving the rebels a technological edge over Assad's weakened troops. The ability to deploy drones effectively increased the rebels' operational reach and effectiveness, enabling them to hit targets that were previously out of reach in past clashes. This gave them an advantage that they lacked all these years and helped them make short work of the weak Russian allied resistance. This wasn't all it did, though, as Ukraine's support went beyond just training. They provided substantial amounts of ammunition to the Syrian rebels. This included small arms, heavy weaponry, and specialized equipment. The steady flow of ammunition was crucial in sustaining the rebels' efforts and allowed them to mount successful offensives against Assad's regime. The quantities of ammunition supplied were significant as well. We're talking about enough arms to equip entire battalions, allowing the rebels to hold their ground and push back against Assad's forces. This influx of arms also meant that the rebels could engage in prolonged battles without the constant fear of running out of supplies. It provided them with the confidence and firepower needed to take on a well-equipped government army. But the impact of this support wasn't just about the physical resources. It also had a psychological effect. Knowing that they had the backing of a nation experienced in fighting against Russian tactics boosted the morale of the Syrian rebels. This psychological advantage cannot be underestimated. It gave them the belief that they could succeed, that they were not alone in their fight, and that victory was within reach. Ukraine became that anchor for the resistance. Having the rebels fight hard allowed Ukraine several advantages. On one hand, if Russia fought on both the Ukrainian and Syrian fronts, then that split of resources would render them weakened on both battlegrounds. On the other hand, because of the vicious fighting in Ukraine, Zelensky knew that Putin would be unable to ease up, meaning he had to abandon Syria and lose a strong and essential geopolitical peace, further weakening him. Given that Assad has since fled the country for Moscow, it is safe to say that Zelensky's plan worked. The fall of Assad's regime has jeopardized Russia's military installations in the country, making it difficult for Moscow to maintain its strategic foothold in the Middle East. We'll dive into this in just a moment. First, let's keep talking about other ways that Ukraine helped rid Syria of Russian influence. Recently, we crossed 1 million subscribers. Ever since then, we have been flooded with emails asking us questions and advice about growing a channel on YouTube. Even though we try our best to reply to every single email, sometimes these take up too much time, or they ask the same question we have answered before. That's why we have decided to put all our YouTube advice into one email bootcamp for completely free. So if you are someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can get our email bootcamp by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. Now back to the video. Another domino that fell due to Ukraine was Russia's PMCs. PMC stands for Private Military Companies, and these are for-profit organizations that provide military services, including combat and security. One of the most infamous private military companies is the Wagner Group, a Russian private military company. The Wagner Group has been heavily involved in supporting Assad's regime during the Syrian civil war, providing a variety of services that have been crucial to Assad's survival. Wagner's involvement in Syria over the years has been multifaceted. They have provided combat support, with Wagner operatives participating in numerous battles alongside Syrian government forces. Their expertise in guerrilla warfare and urban combat has been invaluable in helping Assad regain control over key areas over the years. But their role doesn't stop there. Wagner has also offered logistical support, helping to secure supply lines and ensure that Syrian forces are well-equipped and ready for battle. Additionally, they have trained local forces, improving the overall effectiveness of Assad's military. However, the situation has changed significantly since the conflict in Ukraine escalated. Russia's involvement in Ukraine has stretched its resources thin, and this has had a direct impact on the support that Wagner and other private military companies can provide in Syria. Many of these companies have been redeployed to Ukraine, where their expertise is desperately needed. There have been specific cases where private military contractors were pulled from Syria to support operations in Ukraine. For instance, a significant number of Wagner personnel were moved from Syria to bolster Russian efforts in the Donbas region. This redeployment has weakened Russia's influence in Syria and has had a direct impact on Assad's regime. With fewer experienced fighters and logistical experts on the ground, Assad's forces have found it increasingly difficult to maintain control and repel opposition attacks. But the story doesn't end there. The death of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, in August 2023 has further complicated matters. Prigozhin's death has left a power vacuum within the group, leading to internal conflicts and a decrease in operational effectiveness. To make a bad situation worse, it is speculated that Prigozhin was assassinated due to his disputes with Putin, stemming from the war in Ukraine. All this has just been weakening Russia from the inside, further weakening its ability to function on a united front. With all this talk of a weakening Syria, where has this left us? Well, it's left us with a collapsed regime. The downfall of Assad didn't happen overnight, though. It was a culmination of years of conflict and key turning points. Let me briefly give you an insight into how quickly this happened so you can better understand what I'm about to explain regarding lost Russian assets. One of the most significant moments in the collapse of the Assad regime was the fall of Aleppo in late November 2024. Opposition forces launched a large-scale attack on government-controlled areas and managed to take control of several key locations. The Syrian military, already weakened by years of war and internal corruption, couldn't hold back the coordinated assault. This was a major blow to Assad's regime and signaled a shift in momentum. Another crucial battle was the capture of Homs. This city was a strategic stronghold for Assad's forces, and its fall marked a significant shift in momentum. The rebels managed to push through despite some resistance, and this victory cut off Assad's forces from their coastal strongholds, including the Russian military bases in Tartus and Hamaymim. All this happened because the rebels timed their attacks with weakened Russian and Iranian presence. This was no doubt the doing of the Ukrainian intelligence, feeding the rebels key information and coordinating their attacks with them. With that out of the way, let's talk about the impact of the collapse of Assad's regime on Russia's military assets in Syria. Russia has maintained a significant presence in Tartus and Hamaymim. The two cities are crucial. On the northern edge of the seaport in Tartus is located a Russian naval facility. It is a leased military installation of the Russian Navy that's been crucial in expanding Russia's naval power. On the other end, Hamaymim contains a Syrian airbase currently operated by Russia, located southeast of the city of Latakia in Hamaymim, Syria. The legal status of the base is regulated by a treaty Russia and Syria signed in August 2015. At the end of 2017, Russia said it had decided to turn the Hamaymim base into a component of its permanent military contingent stationed in Syria. This base is now a major Russian military installation used for air operations across Syria. It is one of Russia's most important international outposts and is said to be the airfield through which Assad left the country when he escaped to Moscow. However, with Assad's fall, Russia's position has become more insecure. Maintaining control over these installations is now a major challenge. The security threats have increased, with reports of attacks on Russian personnel and assets. Rebel groups and other militant factions have targeted these installations, posing a significant risk to Russian forces. The situation in Tartus has become particularly tense. The facility is a key logistical hub for Russian operations in the Mediterranean, and its security is of paramount importance. However, rebel advances in the region have increased the risks to this base, with reports of skirmishes and attacks on supply lines. Similarly, the Maymim airbase has faced its own set of challenges. With the fall of Assad, the proximity of rebel-held areas has increased the frequency of attacks on the base. These incidents have included mortar attacks and drone strikes, which have damaged infrastructure and threatened personnel. Things have gotten so bad that satellite images appeared to show Russian forces packing up and dismantling military equipment at Maymim. Videos have shown French Salafi jihadists celebrating and taunting the Russian army as Russian soldiers have started to escape toward Turkey from the airbase. While others are escaping, Russia is still trying to protect these bases however they can, as they represent a solid portion of their international power. The pressure on these military assets has forced Russia to divert resources to protect its installations, further stretching its capabilities. The need to secure Tartus and Maymim has compounded the strain on Russian forces, already engaged on multiple fronts due to the conflict in Ukraine. So, what does this mean for the future of Syria and the region? The fall of Assad has created a power vacuum, and various groups are now vying for control. Russia, however, instead of the major role it played, is looking more and more likely to come out as a loser by the end of all this, all thanks to Ukraine's meddling. On top of all the domestic losses that Russia has suffered in Syria at the hands of Ukraine's scheming, the fall of Assad has affected Russia's regional strategy and its power projection. This is a big deal, so let's break it down. First off, Putin was seen as fairly powerful by many other regional players because he was able to protect Assad. But now, Assad has been overthrown, which shows Putin's weakness. Many Arab states will understand this now, and that will weaken Putin's invincible persona. Also, in continuance from what we just discussed, before Assad fell, Russia had a pretty strong presence in the Mediterranean, thanks to its naval base in Syria. They used this base to project power and challenge NATO's dominance in the region. But now, with Assad gone, Russia's ability to maneuver its naval and air forces in the Mediterranean has been significantly limited. This means they can't move as freely or project power as effectively as they used to. It's also very concerning because Russia's interests in Libya, Sudan, and across Central Africa are all largely dependent on its bases. With those gone, they are in trouble because the only other way to access those regions from there would be through Turkey. Turkey, however, does not allow warships to transit through the Bosphorus Strait, meaning that without the Russian base at Tartus, the only way of projecting naval power into the Mediterranean is through the Baltic, which is hardly ideal. Likewise, without the airbase at Maymim, providing air support to operations in Africa would also depend upon Turkey's goodwill, which is something unlikely to sit well with the Kremlin, given that in the Syrian civil war, they fought on opposite sides. It's no wonder then that other players have become a bit more vocal and boldened as Russia has grown less influential. Turkey, for one, has been quite vocal about its opposition to Assad. With Assad gone, Turkey sees an opportunity to increase its influence in Syria and the broader region free of Russian intervention. They've been supporting opposition groups and even conducting military operations in northern Syria, so they already possess a degree of influence in certain parts of the country. Iran, on the other hand, has been hit hard by Assad's fall. Syria was Iran's closest ally in the Middle East, and they invested heavily in keeping Assad in power. Now, with Assad gone, Iran's ability to project power in the region has been severely diminished. They've had to rethink their strategy and focus more on internal stability. They also have to grasp with the reality of powerless allies as Syria has collapsed and Russia is weakened and busy with Ukraine. The Gulf states, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, have also been affected. They've been supporting different factions in the Syrian conflict, and with Assad gone, they're trying to figure out how to navigate this new landscape. Diplomatically, they've been pushing for a more inclusive government in Syria and trying to rebuild their relationships with the new regime. So in a nutshell, what does all this mean for Russia in the broader geopolitical space? Well, it's a big blow to their regional strategy. They've lost a key ally, and their ability to project power in the Mediterranean has been limited. This has forced them to rethink their approach and focus more on other areas like Africa and Central Asia, which will be hard to do without Turkey's blessing. It's a tough situation. With Assad's regime having fallen, Russia finds itself in a tricky situation. Their military bases in Tartus and Maymim are vital for their regional strategy, as we just discussed, but the changing political landscape has put these installations at risk. To secure these bases, Russia has had to engage in some serious diplomatic efforts. Firstly, Russia has been reaching out to key regional actors to ensure the safety of their military installations. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov has confirmed that talks have begun over these bases with the new Syrian transitional government. Russia is working to establish agreements that would guarantee the continued operation and security of their bases. These negotiations have been delicate, as the new government wants to assert its own sovereignty while also recognizing the strategic importance of Russian support. Beyond Syria, Russia has also been engaging with other influential players in the region. For example, they've been in talks with Turkey. Turkey's influence in northern Syria and its military presence there makes it a critical player in this situation. Russia has been negotiating to ensure that Turkish operations do not threaten their bases in Tartus and Maymim. This has involved high-level diplomatic discussions and some compromises to maintain a fragile balance of power. Iran is another key player that Russia has been extending its diplomatic branch to. While Iran has also lost a strong ally with Assad's fall, it shares a common interest with Russia in maintaining a strategic foothold in Syria. Russia has been coordinating with Iran to align its efforts and provide mutual support for their respective military assets in the country. Not to be left out, Russia has been engaging diplomatically with Saudi Arabia and the UAE as well, to ensure that their actions do not jeopardize Russian military interests. This involves leveraging economic ties and offering reassurances about Russia's long-term commitment to regional stability. So, to emphasize the theme we've been carrying throughout the video, the question is, how does Ukraine fit into all of this? While the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has indirectly led to this situation, Ukraine's resistance has significantly weakened Russia's military resources, forcing them to divert attention and assets away from Syria. This has created opportunities for other regional actors to challenge Russia's presence, complicating their efforts to secure their bases. And how does Ukraine benefit from this? You might ask. Well, the more resources Russia is forced to allocate to securing its interest in Syria, the fewer resources it has available for the conflict in Ukraine. This dynamic helps Ukraine by stretching Russian forces thinner and reducing their effectiveness on multiple fronts, increasing the chances of a Ukrainian victory. This forward and strategic thinking by Ukraine has exemplified military strategy at its finest. With Russia's presence already weakened, and with them on their way to losing their bases, it's hard to not call this anything other than a great tactical victory for Kyiv.